Hey, what's up? Hope everyone's doing alright. Today we're gonna do something a little different, because today, as you may know, is August 7, which for many of you may seem like just another ordinary Thursday, but for me, it's anything but. Because today is the first anniversary of the day that I bought my first film camera, so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to tell you a little bit about myself and my journey with film photography, which, by the way, started long before last year's August. I'm Tiago, I'm 26 years old, I come from Portugal, and I'm a dentist. Having been born in 1999, I can say that during my childhood, film photography was still a popular medium, because despite the prior introduction of digital cameras, they were still expensive as hell back then. I'm pretty sure that most 90s babies like myself remember going with your parents to the photo lab, seeing them hand over one or two film rolls to the clerk, then going back there 1 or 2 days later and picking up prints of photos of you, your siblings, your parents, your cousins, whatever it was. Then came the mid-2000s when everyone and their dog had a Sony Cybershot or some other form of compact digital camera like that. A few years later, most people stopped buying cameras altogether and just used their phones whenever they wanted to take a picture. And what was my position in the midst of all of these revolutions? Well, I didn't really have a position because I wasn't interested in photography at all. Sure, I would sometimes grab my dad's cameras and take a couple of shots of my own, but that was more out of curiosity than out of interest. So, how did we get from that to this? Let's get back to 2024, to April more precisely. It was a weekend like any other, and I was really bored at home, so I called up one of my friends and asked her if she wanted to go for a walk near the beach. So we went, and my friend brought her film camera with her, which was a Canon Prima Zoom 85N. During our walk, she pulled the camera out of her bag and allowed me to take a couple of shots with it. Needless to say, they sucked. But that's besides the point, because at that point, a mild amount of curiosity was already brewing in the back of my mind. So for me, the question was never, am I gonna get a film camera? But instead was, when am I gonna get a film camera? Which film camera am I gonna get? So I spent 3 months searching for the answer to the most popular question on the film community. What's the best film camera for a beginner? And after 3 months of conducting this search almost weekly, I still had no idea of which camera I should get. I still remember when I talked to my dad and I asked him whether he still had his old cameras around the house, and he just gave me that look that said, "What the hell do you want a film camera for?" But sadly, he threw them all out when he made the switch to digital. That's when I decided to go to a local store, explain my situation, and ask for their guidance. So I went in the store, I approached the counter, and I said, I don't know anything about film cameras, but I tried my friend's point and shoot, and it was really cool. So I would like to get a camera of my own. Initially, the assistant recommended one of the newer Kodak Agfa or Ilford models, but I had read some pretty nasty things about those cameras, so I told her that I was looking to get an actual vintage camera, not one that was recently produced. So she starts looking at another shelf, and after a couple of minutes, she's holding what would be my first film camera ever, the Fuji DL25. Now, when it comes to features, this camera is really bottom of the line. There's no flash control, there's no autofocus, and the exposure settings are pretty limited. Now, I will allow you to laugh at me when I say that I dropped 75 euros on this camera. Oh, sweet innocence. A couple of weeks after my purchase, I went on a solo road trip on the northernmost part of Portugal. And of course, I took my new toy with me. And it was an incredible experience being by myself in the middle of the nature, capturing those moments, hanging in almost deserted villages in the middle of nowhere. And of course, my dumb self only brought a roll of film. So yeah, I spent 4 days in the middle of these amazing landscapes and only had 36 shots to capture them. I didn't really see this as a negative experience, but as one that would teach me the limitations and challenges of shooting film. The following month, I went to get my roll developed and really enjoyed seeing the results, despite the lack of quality of the plastic lens. And this is the point at which most people would stop. They wouldn't necessarily stop shooting, but they would stick with their point-and-shoot camera. but I really wanted something a little bit better. However, paying more than 100 euros for a point-and-shoot camera was completely out of the question for me. So I began scouring just about every single second-hand item online platform available in my country. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, I found a listing for a Minolta Revism 70 at the measly price of 10 euros. At the time, I was kinda scared of doing online transactions because of obvious reasons. However, the seller lived in a city really close to me, so I figured why the hell not. Look, it was an old guy and I initially felt sorry for him because he probably had no idea about the resurgence of film, but while I was waiting for him, I went to check his Facebook account. Since we were doing business through Facebook Marketplace, I wanted to see a couple of pictures of him just so I could recognize him when he showed up, and boom, there was a picture of him supporting Portugal's most popular far-right party at the moment. So my pity for him completely evaporated. After a bit, he showed up, he let me test the camera, everything was alright with it, so I handed him a tenner and went on my merry way. Later that week, I saw another listing on Facebook Marketplace, this time for an Olympus Muse Zoom for 30 euros. So I went and picked that one up as well. And by then I was realizing how bad of a purchase the Fuji DL25 had been. Just so you can have an idea, I'm gonna list every camera in my collection that cost me less than the Fuji DL25. Every single one of my toy cameras. Olympus Muse Zoom, Olympus Muse Zoom 115, Olympus Muse 2, Canon Prima AS1, Voigtlander Vito B, Voigtlander Bessa 6x9, PAD 3B, Kodak Retina 1A, Kodak Retina 1B, Canon Canonet QL17, Yashica 635, Yashica Mat 124G, and Yashica T4. By the time I realized it, I already owned 3 point-and-shoot cameras, when in reality I only needed one since I had no intention of starting a collection. Yeah, that aged really well, didn't it? So my plan was to film test both the Minolta and the Olympus and pick between the two the one that I liked the best. Then I would sell the Fuji along with either the Minolta or the Olympus. I decided to keep the Olympus and sell the other two. And with the Minolta, keeping in mind that I bought it for 10 euros, I actually made some profit selling it. This is when a wild idea kicked into my mind. What if I bought cameras, restored them, and resold them? The thing is, I wasn't all that knowledgeable about cameras as of then. So it was around this time that I decided to read the book Photography by Barbara London, Jim Stone and John Upton, which I highly recommend to all beginners I come across. After reading this book, I was yearning for an SLR, so I could practice what I just learned. After a couple of searches on second-hand platforms, I found a listing for a Praktica MTL3 along with a 50mm 2.8 lens, which would be my first SLR camera. And once again, I was in for a beautiful learning experience, as this camera taught me what the hell light leaks were. Turns out the light seal on the door hinge needed replacing, and after doing so, the camera served me well for a couple of months. Around December, I was looking for an SLR camera that was a little fancier than the one that I already had. Don't get me wrong, the Praktica was an absolute tank and a workhorse, but it wasn't all that classy. I needed something with a little more elegance to it. That's when I saw a listing for a Canon 81 on which I would pull the trigger. I was also getting into cameras that were a little more unorthodox, so I got my first TLR, which was a Lubitel 2 and a Voigtlander Vito B. Around this time, I began investing more seriously in the camera reselling business, and to commemorate my newfound success, a couple months later in February, I would buy my dream camera, the Canon UF1. What really fascinates me about this whole film photography thing is the wide array of shooting experiences that you can have with different cameras. Because, as you can imagine, even though the results may be quite similar, it's a completely different experience shooting on my Olympus Muse 2 and on my Leica 3F. I think the only camera that I'm missing as of now would be a medium format SLR, but I'll eventually get one of those as well. When I find one for the right price, that is. And so this is where our story ends, for now. I'm truly grateful for having had the opportunity of playing around and toying a little bit with all of these amazing photographic devices, and of course for having the pleasure of delivering the joy of shooting film to dozens of happy customers. Before I leave, I would like to ask some questions to you guys, both youngins and film veterans alike. First, why did you start shooting film? Second, what was your first film camera? And 3, what's your favorite camera? Thank you so much for your attention, I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.